It was a bright, sunny morning, the kind where the sky looks like a big blue blanket with no clouds in sight. Flight 247 sat on the runway, ready to zoom up into that pretty sky. People were walking onto the plane, finding their seats, and stuffing their bags under chairs or up in the little compartments above. Some were chatting, some were quiet, and a few kids were bouncing in their seats, excited to fly. The plane was buzzing with noise, like a busy beehive. The flight attendants were moving fast, checking tickets, pointing people to their spots, and making sure everything was ready to go. One of those flight attendants was Sarah Miller. She had a loud voice and a face that could scare you if she wasn't happy. Sarah had been doing this job for a while, and she thought she knew everything about it. She'd seen crying babies who wouldn't stop, passengers who spilled their juice all over the floor, and even people who yelled at her for no reason. To her, it was just another day. She walked up and down the aisle with her head held high, like she was the boss of the whole plane. Her words were sharp, like a knife cutting through butter, and her attitude even sharper. She didn't smile much, and if you got in her way, oh boy, you'd hear about it. Sarah thought today would be boring, just like every other day. But guess what? She was so wrong. Now, let's talk about someone else on that plane. In row 12, right near the middle, a man named Tom Harrison was sitting down. Tom wasn't like most of the other passengers. He didn't rush to his seat or push past people. He moved slow, real slow, like he had all the time in the world. Next to him, leaning against his seat, was a cane, a stick he used to help him walk. His legs didn't work as fast as they used to, and that cane was his buddy, always there to help him out. Tom's face looked different too. It wasn't smooth like a kid's face. It had lines and scars, little marks that told a story of a tough life. Those scars weren't just for show, they came from battles, big fights he'd been in a long time ago. He wasn't loud or bossy. He just sat there, quiet, watching the world go by. Most people on the plane didn't even look at Tom. They were too busy with their own stuff, playing games on their phones, eating snacks, or talking to the person next to them. To them, he was just some guy, nothing special. And Sarah? She didn't care about him at all. When she walked by row 12, she barely even glanced his way. Her eyes slid over him like he was a piece of furniture, not a person. She saw the cane, sure, but she didn't think much of it. Maybe she thought he'd be a problem, someone who'd slow her down or ask for too much help. In her mind, he was just another passenger, one of the many faces she'd forget by the end of the day. But here's the thing, Tom wasn't just any passenger. Oh no, not even close. He had a secret, a big one, hiding right under his quiet face and slow steps. It was the kind of secret that could make your jaw drop and your eyes pop out. Sarah didn't know it yet, but Tom was special, way more special than she could ever guess. His secret was like a treasure chest, locked up tight, waiting for the perfect moment to open. And when it did, it would turn everything upside down, especially for Sarah. Her day wasn't going to be boring at all. It was going to be wild, crazy, and maybe even a little scary for her. Let's imagine that plane for a second. It was big, with rows and rows of seats all lined up. The windows were small but bright, letting in that sunny light from outside. The air smelled like coffee and airplane food, those little trays of chicken and rice they hand out later. People were settling in, buckling their seat belts, and getting comfy. The engines hummed, a low rumble you could feel in your chest, like the plane was waking up. Sarah was up front, talking to another flight attendant, probably complaining about something. She liked to complain, it made her feel important. Meanwhile, Tom just sat there in row 12, his hands resting on his cane, looking out the window at the runway. He didn't say a word, but his eyes, they were sharp, watching everything. The other passengers didn't know it, but Tom wasn't new to planes. He'd been on lots of them, more than most people ever will. He wasn't just some guy going on a trip. He had a reason for being there, a big reason. But he didn't show it. He didn't brag or act big. He was quiet, like a mouse sneaking through a kitchen. That's what made him so tricky. No one saw him coming. Not Sarah, not the other flight attendants, not even the pilot up front steering the plane. They all thought he was nobody. Boy, were they in for a surprise. Sarah kept doing her job as the plane got ready to fly. She walked up and down, telling people to sit down, put their bags away, and stop messing around. Her voice was loud, cutting through the noise like a teacher calling out a kid in class. Hey, you, buckle up, she'd snap, pointing at someone. Or, no, you can't put that there. She liked being in charge, and she made sure everyone knew it. If someone asked her for help, she'd sigh, like it was the hardest thing in the world. To her, these passengers were just a bunch of annoyances, people she had to deal with until the flight was over. And Tom? He was one of them, maybe even worse because of that cane. She didn't say it out loud, but you could tell she thought he'd be trouble. But Tom didn't mind her attitude. He didn't get mad or yell back. He just watched. His eyes followed her as she moved, like he was studying her. Maybe he was thinking about something, planning something. His face didn't give anything away, it was calm, like a still pond with no ripples. That's the thing about Tom, he didn't need to shout to be strong. He had a kind of power that didn't show on the outside, not yet. It was hiding, waiting for the right time to jump out and surprise everyone. Let's think about that plane again. It wasn't a fancy one, just a regular airplane you'd see at any airport. The seats were blue, a little worn out from all the people who'd sat in them before. The carpet on the floor was gray, with a few stains here and there, maybe from spilled soda or a kid dropping their snack. The overhead lights were on, making everything look bright and clean, even if it wasn't perfect. Outside, the sun was climbing higher, shining through those little windows and bouncing off the metal wings. The plane was alive, full of people and stories, but none of them were as big as Tom's story. Sarah didn't know it, but she was about to step into something huge. She thought she was the queen of that plane, the one who called the shots. She'd tell people what to do, and they'd listen or else. But Tom? He didn't fit into her little world. He wasn't someone she could boss around, not really. He was different, and not just because of his cane or his scars. There was something about him, something big and quiet, like a storm waiting to break. Sarah couldn't see it yet. To her, he was just a slow old man in row 12, someone she could ignore or snap at if he got in her way. The plane's engines got louder now, a big roar that shook the seats a little. People stopped talking as the pilot's voice came over the speakers. "Good morning, folks," he said. "This is Flight 247, heading to Chicago. We'll be taking off soon, so sit tight and enjoy the ride." Everyone settled down, ready for the trip. Sarah stood at the front, arms crossed, looking out over the rows like a guard watching prisoners. She didn't smile, didn't wave, just stared. She was ready to get this flight over with and go home. But Tom? He wasn't in a hurry. He leaned back in his seat, his cane still by his side. His hands were folded in his lap, and he looked out the window again. The plane started to move, rolling slow at first, then picking up speed. The runway stretched out ahead, long and straight, leading up to the sky. Tom's eyes stayed on that view, like he was thinking about something far away. Maybe he was remembering his battles, the ones that left those scars. Or maybe he was thinking about what was coming next, right here on this plane. Sarah didn't notice how calm he was. She was too busy being annoyed. She muttered to herself as she walked by him again, something about lazy passengers and too much work. She didn't even look down at him this time, just kept going, her shoes clicking on the floor. If she'd stopped, if she'd really looked at Tom, maybe she'd have seen something in his eyes. A spark, a hint, a little clue that he wasn't what he seemed. But she didn't. She missed it completely. The plane was almost ready to lift off now. It sped down the runway, faster and faster, until the wheels left the ground. Up it went, climbing into that big blue sky. The passengers cheered a little, like they always do when a plane takes off. Kids pressed their noses to the windows, watching the ground get smaller and smaller. Sarah stood at the front, holding onto a seat for balance, her face still grumpy. She didn't cheer. She didn't care. To her, this was just another flight, another bunch of people to deal with. But down in row 12, Tom smiled. It was a small smile, one you might miss if you weren't looking close. He wasn't smiling at the takeoff or the view. No, he was smiling because he knew something no one else did. That secret of his? It was still locked up tight, but not for long. Soon, it would come out, and when it did, everything would change. Sarah's sharp words, Her bossy attitude, her mean looks, they'd all come crashing down. She had no idea what was waiting for her, just a few hours away. Let's picture Tom for a minute. He wasn't tall or short, just average. His hair was gray, cut short, and his clothes were simple: a plain jacket, a shirt, some pants. Nothing fancy, nothing that screamed "look at me." That cane of his was wood, polished smooth, with a little curve at the top where he held it. It wasn't shiny or new, but it looked strong, like it had been with him through a lot. His scars were the real story, though. They ran across his cheek and down his neck, faded but still there. They weren't ugly, they made him look tough, like someone who'd faced hard things and come out the other side. Sarah didn't see any of that. She didn't see the strength in his slow steps or the story in his scars. To her, he was just a guy with a cane, someone who might ask for too much help. She didn't like helping people unless she had to. It slowed her down, made her job harder. So when she looked at Tom, if she looked at all, she saw a problem, not a person. That was her mistake, and it was a big one. The plane was up high now, flying smooth through the sky. The sun shone bright outside, making little squares of light on the floor through the windows. People started relaxing, pulling out books or snacks. A kid a few rows ahead of Tom giggled, playing with a toy car. The flight attendants except Sarah started smiling, getting ready to pass out drinks. It felt like a normal flight, nothing crazy, nothing out of place. But that was just the start. The real story was sitting right there in row 12, quiet as can be. Tom didn't move much. He didn't fidget or fuss. He just sat, his cane by his side, his hands still. He looked like he belonged there, like he was part of the plane itself. But he wasn't just along for the ride. He had a purpose, a big one, and it was tied to that secret of his. What was it? Well, we'll get to that soon. For now, he was just Tom, the quiet man with the cane, watching and waiting. Sarah, meanwhile, was already annoyed again. Someone in row 5 spilled their water, and she had to grab a towel to clean it up. "Can't you be more careful?" she grumbled, loud enough for everyone to hear. The passenger said sorry, but Sarah just shook her head and walked away. She didn't like messes, didn't like surprises, didn't like anything that made her day harder. And Tom? He was about to be the biggest surprise of all. The flight kept going, steady and calm. The pilot came on again, saying they'd be in Chicago in a few hours. People nodded, happy to hear it. Sarah stood at the back now, flipping through a little book, maybe her schedule or a list of rules. She looked bored, like she couldn't wait to land and be done. She had no clue that this flight wasn't going to be like the others. It wasn't going to end with her walking off the plane, complaining about her day. No, this flight was special, and it was all because of the man in row 12. Tom's secret wasn't something small, like a hidden candy bar or a cool toy. It was huge, bigger than the plane itself. It was the kind of secret that could change everything: how people saw him, how they acted, even how the whole flight would end. Sarah thought she was in control, but she wasn't. Not really. Tom was the one with the power, even if he didn't show it yet. He didn't need to. He was patient, waiting for the right moment. Let's think about that plane one more time. It was high above the clouds now, so high you couldn't see the ground anymore. The sky outside was endless, stretching out forever. Inside, it was warm, the air humming from the engines. The seats were full, every row packed with people going somewhere: home, vacation, work, who knows. Sarah was part of that world, moving through it like she owned it. But Tom? He was outside it, above it, waiting to shake it all up. So there they were, Sarah, the loud flight attendant with the sharp tongue, and Tom, the quiet man with the big secret. She didn't know it, but her day was about to turn upside down. And Tom? He was ready. He'd been ready for a long time. The plane kept flying, steady and sure, carrying them both towards something wild. What do you think Tom's secret was? Can you guess? Stick around, because it's coming, and it's going to be big. Setting the conflict and tension. The big plane, Flight 247, lifted off the ground nice and smooth, like a bird flapping its wings for the first time. The sun was shining outside, and the clouds looked like fluffy white pillows floating below. Everyone inside the plane was settling in. Some people were pulling out snacks, Others were looking out the tiny windows, and a few kids were giggling in their seats. The engines hummed, a low sound you could feel in your tummy, and it seemed like it was going to be a calm trip. But oh boy, trouble was coming, and it was coming fast. In row 12, Tom Harrison sat quietly with his cane next to him. He was the slow-moving man with scars on his face, the one nobody paid much attention to. Tom wasn't loud or fussy, but he needed a little help. His bag was up in the compartment above his seat, and it was a bit too high for him to reach easily with his sore legs. So, he did what any passenger might do: he pressed the little call button above his head. It made a soft ding sound, like a bell in a quiet room. Tom waited, his voice ready to ask nicely for help. He wasn't mad or pushy. He just needed someone to grab his bag for him. Up at the front of the plane, Sarah Miller heard that ding. She was the flight attendant with the sharp tongue and the even sharper attitude. She'd been walking around, telling people to sit down and buckle up, acting like she was the queen of the whole plane. When that call button lit up, she stopped in her tracks. Her face scrunched up, and she rolled her eyes so hard you'd think they might pop right out of her head and roll down the aisle. "What now?" she grumbled, loud enough for the people nearby to hear. She didn't want to deal with anyone asking for anything. To her, every little request was a big bother. Sarah stomped over to row 12, her shoes making loud clack-clack noises on the floor. She stood over Tom, her hands on her hips, looking down at him like he was a bug she wanted to squish. "Can't you figure it out yourself?" she snapped. Her voice was mean, like a teacher scolding a kid who forgot their homework. She didn't even wait for Tom to answer. She just glared at him, her eyes narrow and her mouth twisted into a frown. To her, Tom was just another annoying passenger, someone slowing her down on a busy day. Tom didn't say much back. He stayed calm, like a still pond with no waves. His voice was soft and polite when he finally spoke. "I just need help with my bag," he said, pointing up at the compartment with his shaky hand. His cane rested against his leg, and he didn't move fast, but he wasn't rude. He wasn't asking for the moon, just a little help. But Sarah? She didn't care about his calm voice or his polite words. She huffed, a big puff of air coming out of her nose, like a dragon getting ready to breathe fire. Around Tom, the other passengers started to notice. A lady in row 11 turned her head, her eyebrows going up like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. A man across the aisle whispered to his wife, "Did she just say that?" Their voices were quiet, like little mice squeaking, but you could tell they weren't happy. Some people glared at Sarah, their eyes shooting little darts her way. They didn't like how she was talking to Tom. He wasn't doing anything wrong, after all. But Sarah didn't notice the whispers or the glares. She didn't care what anyone thought. She was too busy being mad. "I'm not your personal servant," she hissed, her voice loud and sharp, cutting through the air like a knife. Everyone in the rows nearby could hear her now. It wasn't a whisper anymore, it was a shout, almost. She wanted Tom to feel small, like he didn't matter. She stood there, towering over him, her arms crossed tight across her chest. She thought she was showing everyone who was boss, like a big kid pushing a little kid around on the playground. Tom didn't argue. He didn't yell or get red in the face. His hand stayed steady on his cane, gripping it just a little tighter. He looked up at Sarah, his eyes meeting hers for a second. But then, he tried something. He reached up with one hand, slow and careful, to adjust his bag himself. He didn't want to bug her anymore, he just wanted to fix it and be done. His fingers stretched toward the compartment, shaky but sure. And that's when it happened. Sarah's hand shot out like lightning smack. She slapped Tom's hand away, hard enough that you could hear the sound bounce off the seats. "Don't touch that," she barked, her voice loud and angry, like a dog guarding its food. The whole plane seemed to freeze. Gasps filled the air, little oohs and ahs from every direction. The lady in row 11 covered her mouth with her hand. The man across the aisle sat up straight, his eyes wide. Even a kid a few rows back stopped playing with his toy and looked over. Everyone was shocked. Sarah didn't back down. She stood there, her chest puffed out, like she'd just won a big fight. She thought she was in charge, the one calling the shots. To her, slapping Tom's hand was no big deal, it was just her way of keeping things under control. She didn't care about the gasps or the stares. She didn't even look around to see how mad people were getting. She just glared at Tom, waiting for him to shrink away and be quiet. But Tom? He didn't shrink. He didn't yell or cry or make a scene. He just sat back in his seat, slow and steady, like nothing could shake him. His hand dropped back to his lap, resting on his cane again. His face didn't change much, but his eyes, they narrowed just a tiny bit. It was a small move, one you might miss if you weren't looking close. Those eyes weren't soft anymore. They were sharp now, like a hawk watching its prey. Something was brewing inside him, something big and strong, bubbling up under his calm outside. The plane kept flying, high above the clouds, but the air inside felt different now. It wasn't calm anymore, it was thick, like before a storm hits. The passengers kept whispering, their voices buzzing like bees. "She can't do that," one lady said, shaking her head. "That poor man didn't do anything," a guy muttered, frowning. They were on Tom's side, even if they didn't know him. They could see he wasn't the problem, Sarah was. But she didn't hear them, or maybe she didn't want to. She turned on her heel and stomped back up the aisle, her shoes clacking again, leaving Tom behind. Tom didn't move. He sat there, still as a statue, his cane by his side. His scarred face didn't show anger or sadness, just quiet. But inside, something was happening. You could almost feel it, like a pot of water starting to boil. He wasn't just sitting there doing nothing. He was thinking, planning maybe. His eyes followed Sarah as she walked away, watching her every step. What was he thinking about? What was he getting ready for? It was hard to tell, but one thing was clear: Tom wasn't going to let this slide. Let's picture that moment again. The plane was big, with rows of blue seats stretching all the way back. The little lights above were on, shining down on everyone. The windows showed nothing but white clouds outside, like the plane was floating in a dream. People were still buckled in, some with blankets over their legs, some sipping water from plastic cups. The air smelled like coffee and those airplane cookies they hand out. It should have been peaceful, but it wasn't, not anymore. Sarah thought she'd won. She thought slapping Tom's hand and yelling at him made her look strong. She marched up to the front of the plane, her head high, like she was proud of herself. She even smirked a little, a tiny twist of her lips, like she'd just taught Tom a lesson. To her, he was nobody, just a slow old man with a cane, someone she could push around. She didn't think twice about what she'd done. She didn't care about the gasps or the whispers. In her mind, she was the boss, and that was that. But the other passengers didn't see it that way. The lady in row 11 kept looking back at Tom, her face soft with worry. "That wasn't right," she said to the person next to her. The man across from Tom shook his head, his arms crossed tight. "She's mean," he whispered to his wife. Even the kid with the toy car peeked over his seat, his big eyes staring at Sarah like she was a monster. They all felt it, something unfair had happened, and it didn't sit right with them. Tom could hear the whispers, even if they were quiet. He didn't turn his head or look around, but he knew people were watching. His hand stayed on his cane, steady as ever. That slap didn't make him flinch or cry out. It didn't make him mad, at least, not on the outside. But those narrowed eyes? They told a different story. Something was building up in him, like a wave getting ready to crash on the shore. He wasn't just sitting there taking it. He was waiting, holding onto something big. Sarah didn't notice any of that. She was too busy being herself, loud, bossy, and grumpy. She went back to her spot at the front, flipping through a little clipboard she carried. Maybe it was a list of passengers or things she had to do. She muttered under her breath, complaining about how hard her job was. "Always something," she said to another flight attendant, who just nodded and looked away. Sarah didn't see Tom's eyes or feel the tension in the air. She was blind to it, too wrapped up in her own world. The plane kept going, flying smooth and steady. The pilot's voice came on the speaker again, crackly but clear. "Folks, we're cruising at 30,000 feet, he said. "Should be a nice ride to Chicago." People nodded, happy to hear it. Some pulled out books or closed their eyes to nap. It was quiet again, but not really. That slap had changed things. It was like a pebble dropped in a puddle. The ripples were still spreading, even if you couldn't see them yet. Tom sat back in his seat, his cane still by his side. His jacket was plain, his hair gray and short. He didn't look like someone who'd caused trouble. But those scars on his face? They said he'd been through tough stuff before. And that cane? It wasn't just for walking, it was part of him, like a shield. He didn't need to shout or fight to show he was strong. He had a different kind of strength, one Sarah couldn't see. The passengers kept watching, sneaking little looks at Tom and Sarah. The lady in row 11 turned to her friend again. "I hope he's okay," she said, her voice low. The man across the aisle leaned over to his wife. "She shouldn't have done that," he said, shaking his head. They didn't know Tom, but they felt bad for him. They could see he didn't deserve Sarah's meanness. And Sarah? She didn't care. She kept doing her job, passing out drinks now, her face still grumpy. But Tom wasn't just sitting there feeling sorry for himself. That slap didn't break him, it woke something up. His eyes stayed on Sarah, even as she moved farther away. He didn't blink much. He didn't fidget. He was like a cat watching a mouse, waiting for the right moment to pounce. What was he planning? Was he going to say something? Do something? It was hard to tell, but you could feel it, something big was coming. Let's imagine that plane again. The seats were a little worn, the carpet a little dirty. The air was warm, and the hum of the engines was steady, like a lullaby. People were sipping their drinks now, water, juice, soda, little plastic cups all over the place. The kid with the toy car was rolling it on his tray table, making quiet vroom noises. It was a normal flight, or it should have been. But Sarah's slap had turned it into something else. The tension was there, hanging in the air like a heavy cloud. Sarah kept moving, handing out drinks with quick, jerky moves. "Here," she'd say, practically tossing the cups at people. She didn't smile, didn't say please or thank you. She was mad at Tom, at the passengers, at the whole day. She didn't know it yet, but she'd just lit a match, and the fire was starting to grow. Tom was the spark, and he wasn't going to let her get away with it. Tom's hand rested on his cane, his fingers tapping it just a little. It wasn't a nervous tap, it was slow, like he was counting something. His face was still calm, but those eyes? They were alive now, sharp and focused. He wasn't scared of Sarah. He wasn't even mad, not in a loud way. He was something else, ready. Ready for what? That's the big question. What do you think he was planning? Something small, or something huge? The plane flew on, the clouds drifting by outside. The passengers settled down again, but their eyes kept darting back to row 12. They wanted to see what would happen next. Sarah thought she'd won, thought she'd put Tom in his place. But she didn't know him. She didn't know what he was hiding. That slap? It wasn't the end, it was the beginning. And Tom? He was just getting started. Rising action and small revelations. The plane kept flying high in the sky, zooming through the fluffy white clouds like a big metal bird. Everything seemed normal on the outside. People were sipping their drinks, some were napping, and a few kids were coloring in their books. The engines hummed along, a soft noise that made the seats buzz just a little. But inside the plane, things were heating up. The trouble that started with Sarah and Tom wasn't over, not even close. It was growing, like a snowball rolling down a hill, getting bigger and bigger. Sarah Miller, the flight attendant with the loud voice and mean attitude, didn't let up. She wasn't done picking on Tom. Oh no, she kept going, like a bully who doesn't know when to stop. A little while after takeoff, Tom needed to use the bathroom. He unbuckled his seat belt, grabbed his cane, and stood up slow and careful. His legs didn't move fast, and that cane helped him balance as he started walking down the aisle. He didn't rush or push, he just took his time, one step after another, hobbling along. Sarah was standing near the middle of the plane, holding a tray of empty cups she'd picked up from passengers. She saw Tom coming and rolled her eyes again, like she was so annoyed she couldn't stand it. Then, she turned to another flight attendant, a younger girl with a ponytail, and started talking loud enough for everyone to hear. "Look at him," Sarah said, pointing at Tom with her chin. "Hobbling like an old turtle." She laughed, a sharp, nasty laugh that sounded like a barking dog. The other flight attendant giggled too, covering her mouth with her hand, but you could tell she wasn't sure if she should laugh or not. Sarah smirked, her lips twisting up like she thought she was so clever. Tom kept walking, his cane tapping the floor with every step. Tap, tap, tap. He didn't look at Sarah or say anything back. His face stayed calm, like he didn't even hear her. But the other passengers? They heard every word, and they weren't happy. A man in a red shirt sitting a few rows ahead turned around, his eyebrows scrunching up. A lady with glasses near the window shook her head, her mouth tight like she'd just eaten something sour. The air in the plane started to feel heavy, like something big was bubbling up. One passenger, a big guy with a beard in row 10, couldn't take it anymore. He leaned out into the aisle as Tom passed by and looked right at Sarah. "Hey," he said, his voice loud but not yelling. "Stop it. Leave him alone." His words were simple, but you could tell he meant them. He didn't like seeing Tom get picked on for no reason. The lady with glasses nodded, agreeing with him, and a few other people mumbled, "Yeah," under their breath. They were getting mad now, really mad. But Sarah? She didn't care one bit. She turned to the bearded guy, her eyes flashing like little fires. "Mind your business," she shot back, her voice sharp and quick, like a whip cracking. She didn't even blink, she just stared him down, daring him to say more. The bearded guy frowned but leaned back in his seat, muttering something to himself. Sarah smirked again, like she'd won a little battle. She thought she was the boss of everyone, and nobody could tell her what to do. Tom made it to the bathroom at the back of the plane. It took him a while, but he got there, his cane tapping all the way. The door clicked shut behind him, and for a minute, things quieted down. Sarah went back to picking up cups, grumbling to herself about rude passengers and too much work. She didn't think twice about what she'd said or how mad people were getting. To her, it was just another day, and Tom was just another person to boss around. She didn't see the storm brewing right under her nose. When Tom came out of the bathroom, he started his slow walk back to row 12. Tap, tap, tap. His cane hit the floor again, steady and sure. Sarah was nearby, handing out little bags of pretzels to some kids. She saw him coming and whispered something to the other flight attendant, the ponytail girl. They both giggled again, hiding their mouths behind their hands. "He's so slow," Sarah said, loud enough for the people in the back rows to hear. "Like a snail with a stick." The ponytail girl laughed harder this time, her shoulders shaking. The passengers weren't laughing, though. The lady with glasses turned to the person next to her and whispered, "She's so mean." The bearded guy clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. A mom holding a baby a few seats away rocked her little one and frowned at Sarah. "That's not nice," she said softly, but her eyes were hard. Everyone could see it now, Sarah wasn't just grumpy. She was being a bully, picking on Tom because he couldn't move fast. And they didn't like it one bit. Tom got back to his seat and sat down, slow and careful, just like before. He didn't look mad or sad. He was cool as ice, like nothing could rattle him. He set his cane against the seat next to him and settled in, his hands resting in his lap. Then, he did something funny. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small notebook, just a little one, the kind you might use to write a shopping list. It had a plain black cover and a tiny pencil tucked into the side. He flipped it open to a blank page and started scribbling something down. His hand moved slow but steady, the pencil scratching across the paper. What was he writing? Nobody knew. The lady with glasses peeked over, curious, but she couldn't see from her seat. The bearded guy raised an eyebrow, wondering what was up. Was it a complaint about Sarah? A list of things he didn't like? Or maybe something else? Tom didn't say a word, he just wrote, his face still calm, his eyes focused on the page. Sarah didn't notice the notebook at first. She was too busy tossing pretzel bags at people and rolling her eyes when they said thank you. But a little later, she walked by row 12 again, carrying a trash bag. Tom pressed his call button one more time, ding, and Sarah's head snapped around. "What now?" she barked, stomping over like an angry bear. "What do you want this time?" Her voice was loud, cutting through the hum of the plane. "I need some water," Tom said, his voice soft and polite, just like before. He didn't raise his tone or snap back. He just asked, simple as that. But Sarah huffed, her face turning red. "Get it yourself," she muttered, loud enough for him to hear. Then she turned away, like he wasn't even worth her time. The passengers nearby gasped again, quieter this time, but you could feel their anger growing. Tom didn't argue. He just nodded a little, like he expected her to be rude. Then he picked up his notebook again and wrote something else. Scratch, scratch, scratch. The pencil moved across the paper, adding more words to whatever he was working on. Sarah didn't see it. She'd already walked off, complaining to the ponytail girl about needy people. But the passengers saw. The bearded guy leaned over to his neighbor and whispered, "He's writing something." "What's he doing?" The lady with glasses nodded, her eyes big. "Maybe he's telling someone about her," she said. The flight went on, and Sarah kept being mean. Every time Tom moved or asked for something small, she'd snap at him. "Stop bothering me," she'd say, "or do it yourself." She didn't care who heard her. She wanted everyone to know she wasn't going to help him. And every time she said something nasty, Tom would pull out that notebook and write a little more. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It was like clockwork. She'd be rude, and he'd write. She'd laugh at him, and he'd write again. The tension in the air got thicker and thicker, like fog rolling in on a cold day. You could feel it all over the plane. The passengers were whispering more now, their voices buzzing like a hive of bees. "She's awful," the mom with the baby said, rocking her little one faster. "He's not hurting anyone," the bearded guy grumbled, his arms crossed tight. Even the kids stopped coloring for a minute, looking around like they knew something was wrong. Tom stayed cool through it all. He didn't yell or fight back. He didn't even look mad. His face was like a mask, calm and steady, no matter what Sarah said. But that notebook? It was filling up. Page after page, he kept writing, slow and careful. What was he building? Was it a plan? A story? A way to get back at Sarah? Nobody could tell, but it was like he was stacking bricks, one by one, making something big. Let's picture the plane again. The seats were blue and a little scratched up, with trays that wobbled when you pulled them down. The carpet on the floor was gray, with some crumbs stuck in it from snacks. The little windows showed clouds zooming by outside, white and soft against the bright blue sky. The air smelled like pretzels and juice, and the hum of the engines was a steady song. It should have been a happy place, but Sarah was making it sour. She kept walking up and down the aisle, her shoes clacking loud on the floor. She'd toss things at passengers, napkins, cups, whatever, like she didn't care if they caught them or not. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the noise every time she opened her mouth. "Sit down," she'd snap at a kid who stood up to stretch. "Stop asking me stuff," she'd growl at someone who wanted a blanket. She was like a storm cloud, raining on everyone's day. But Tom? He was the opposite. He sat there in row 12, quiet as a mouse, his cane resting by his side. His jacket was plain, his hair gray, and those scars on his face told a story nobody knew yet. He didn't fuss or fidget. He just wrote in that notebook, his pencil moving slow and sure. Every mean word from Sarah was like fuel, making him write more. The passengers watched him, curious and a little worried. "What's he up to?" the lady with glasses whispered. "I don't know, but I hope it's good," the bearded guy said back. The plane flew on, steady and smooth, but the feeling inside was anything but smooth. It was bumpy, like a road full of potholes. Sarah thought she was in charge, laughing and snapping at Tom like he was nothing. She didn't see the way people looked at her now, angry, tired, done with her attitude. And she didn't see Tom's notebook, or the way his eyes got sharper every time she opened her mouth. Something huge was coming. You could feel it in your bones, like when you know a big rain is about to hit. Tom wasn't just taking her meanness, he was doing something with it. That notebook was his secret weapon, maybe. Was he writing a letter to get her in trouble? A list of everything she did wrong? Or something even bigger? The passengers didn't know, and neither did Sarah. But they all felt it. Something was building, and it was going to be wild. Let's think about Tom for a second. He wasn't loud or big or fast. He was slow, with that cane and those scars. But he was strong in a quiet way, like a tree that bends in the wind but doesn't break. Sarah didn't see that strength. She saw weakness, someone she could push around. But every time she pushed, Tom wrote. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It was like he was collecting her words, saving them up for something. The flight kept going, the clouds drifting by outside. The pilot came on the speaker again, his voice crackly but cheerful. "We're halfway to Chicago, folks," he said. "Sit back and relax. but nobody was relaxed, not really. Sarah's meanness had stirred things up, and Tom's notebook was keeping everyone guessing. The bearded guy kept sneaking looks at Tom, like he was trying to figure him out. The lady with glasses adjusted her glasses, staring hard. Even the mom with the baby rocked slower, her eyes darting between Sarah and Tom. Sarah didn't stop. She kept walking, kept snapping, kept laughing at Tom every chance she got. "Look at him, sitting there like a lump," she said to the ponytail girl, loud enough for the back rows to hear. The ponytail girl nodded, giggling again, but her laugh was weaker now, like she wasn't so sure anymore. The passengers weren't laughing with them, they were grumbling, their voices low but angry. "She's too much," someone said. "Poor guy," another whispered. "And Tom?" He wrote again. Scratch, scratch, scratch. That little pencil kept moving, filling up the pages. His hand didn't shake, his face didn't change. He was cool as ice, steady as a rock. Whatever he was up to, it was big. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Something was coming, something huge. Can you guess what Tom was planning? What would you do if you were him? Stick around, because it's only getting wilder from here. Climax and big reveal. The plane had been flying for hours, high above the clouds, zooming through the sky like a giant metal bird. Now, it was time to land. The pilot's voice came on the speaker, crackly but clear. "Folks, we're touching down in Chicago. Thanks for flying with us." The engines roared a little louder, then got softer as the plane slowed down. The wheels hit the ground with a little bump, and everyone felt that jolt in their seats. The plane rolled along the runway, nice and steady, until it stopped at the gate. People started unbuckling their seat belts, grabbing their bags, and standing up, ready to get off. It was the end of the trip, or so they thought. But oh boy, things were about to get crazy. Up at the front of the plane, Sarah Miller stood by the door. She was the flight attendant with the sharp tongue and mean attitude, the one who'd been picking on Tom the whole flight. Now, she had to say goodbye to everyone as they left. She put on a fake smile, the kind that doesn't reach your eyes, and started talking in a sugary voice that didn't sound like her at all. "Bye-bye, have a nice day," she said to each passenger, waving her hand like she was happy to see them go. Her lips were stretched tight, but you could tell she didn't mean it. She just wanted everyone off her plane so she could be done. The passengers filed out, one by one, walking past her toward the door. Some smiled back, some just nodded, and a few didn't even look at her. They were tired from the flight, ready to stretch their legs and go home. The line moved slow but steady, like a parade of ants marching along. Sarah kept up her fake smile, her arms crossed when she wasn't waving, muttering under her breath about how long it was taking. She thought she'd made it through the day, that she was in the clear. She had no idea what was coming. Then it was Tom's turn. Tom Harrison, the quiet man from row 12, the one with the cane and the scars on his face. He'd been calm and cool the whole flight, even when Sarah was mean to him. Now, he stood up from his seat, slow and careful, like he always did. He grabbed his cane with one hand, leaning on it a little as he got his balance. His other hand held his small bag, the one Sarah wouldn't help him with earlier. He didn't rush, he never did. Step by step, tap, 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 his cane hit the floor as he walked down the aisle toward the front. The other passengers watched him go. The lady with glasses from a few rows up turned her head, her eyes big and curious. The bearded guy from row 10 leaned out into the aisle, his arms still crossed, like he was waiting for something. The mom with the baby rocked her little one and peeked over her shoulder. They all remembered how Sarah had treated Tom, snapping at him, slapping his hand, laughing at his slow walk. They didn't know what would happen next, but they could feel it, something big was in the air. Tom got closer to the front, his cane tapping along. Sarah saw him coming and rolled her eyes, just a little, so quick you might miss it. Her fake smile stayed on, but it got tighter, like it hurt her face to keep it there. She didn't say anything at first, just watched him hobble toward her, her arms crossed again. Tom didn't look at her yet. He kept his eyes straight ahead, his face calm, like a still pond with no ripples. He was almost at the door, almost past her, when Sarah opened her mouth. "Finally, get out of my sight," she muttered, her voice low but mean, like a snake hissing. She didn't say it loud, but it was loud enough for Tom and a few people nearby to hear. She thought she was safe, thought she could sneak in one last jab and get away with it. Her fake smile twitched, turning into a smirk for just a second, like she was proud of herself. That was her big mistake. Oh boy, she shouldn't have said that. Tom stopped. Right there, just a step from the door, he froze. His cane tapped the floor one last time, tap, and then nothing. He didn't keep walking. He didn't shuffle away like she wanted him to. Instead, he turned, slow and steady, until he was facing her. His head tilted up, and his eyes locked onto hers, like two little lights shining right at her face. Sarah blinked, surprised, her smirk fading fast. The air in the plane got thick, like it was holding its breath. You might want to watch how you talk to people, Tom said. His voice was low, not loud or shouty, but strong like a deep drum beating once. It wasn't shaky or weak. It was steady, clear, and it hit Sarah like a slap she didn't expect. The passengers still in the aisle stopped moving. The lady with glasses gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The bearded guy's eyebrows shot up, and he leaned forward, like he didn't want to miss a word. Sarah stared at Tom, her eyes wide for a second. Then she laughed, a short, sharp laugh, like a bark. Oh yeah, she said, her voice dripping with sass. And who are you to tell me that? She crossed her arms tighter, sticking her chin out like she was daring him. She thought he was just some old guy with a cane, someone she could push around all day and get away with it. She had no idea who she was talking to. Her laugh echoed a little, bouncing off the walls of the quiet plane, and she smirked again, waiting for him to back down. But Tom didn't back down. He didn't flinch or look away. He stood there, his cane in one hand, his bag in the other, and his eyes never left hers. Then, he did something that made everyone's jaw drop. He reached into his jacket pocket slow, like he had all the time in the world, and pulled out a badge. It was small but shiny, gold, and bright, catching the light from the overhead bulbs. On it was the airline's logo, a little plane with wings, the same one painted on the side of the plane they were all standing in. I'm Tom Harrison, he said, holding up the badge so Sarah could see it clear as day. His voice was still low, still strong, like a rock that wouldn't move. I own this airline. Boom. That was it. The bomb dropped, and the whole plane went silent. You could hear a pin drop, it was so quiet. Nobody moved, nobody breathed. Sarah's face froze, her eyes stuck on that badge like she couldn't believe it was real. Her fake smile. Gone. Her smirk. Wiped away like chalk on a board. Her face turned white, pale as a ghost, like all the color ran away and hid. Her jaw dropped, her mouth hanging open so wide you could see her teeth. What? She stammered, her voice shaky now, not sharp or mean anymore. She blinked fast, like she was trying to wake up from a bad dream. But this wasn't a dream, it was real, and it was happening right in front of her. Tom didn't blink. He didn't smile or laugh. He just stood there, holding that badge, looking at her with those sharp eyes. You've been rude to my passengers and me all day, he said, his words slow and clear, like he wanted her to hear every single one. I've been watching. And trust me, I don't forget. His voice was like thunder, quiet but powerful, rolling through the plane and shaking Sarah to her core. The truth was out, and it hit like a lightning bolt. Sarah's world wasn't just shaking, it was crumbling, falling apart like a house made of cards. The passengers gasped again, louder this time, their eyes bouncing between Tom and Sarah. The lady with glasses clapped her hands together, her face lighting up. The bearded guy let out a big ha, like he'd just won a bet. The mom with the baby smiled, rocking her little one faster. They couldn't believe it. Tom, the quiet man with the cane, the one Sarah had picked on all day, was the boss of the whole airline. Sarah couldn't move. She stood there, her arms dropping to her sides, her clipboard slipping a little in her hand. What? She said again, softer now, like she was talking to herself. Her eyes darted around, looking at the badge, then at Tom, then at the passengers staring at her. She didn't know what to do. Her sharp tongue was gone, her mean attitude melted away. She looked small now, like a kid caught doing something naughty. Tom lowered the badge, tucking it back into his pocket. He didn't need to wave it around anymore, everyone knew now. He leaned on his cane, just a little, and kept staring at Sarah. I've been on this flight to see how things work, he said. and you've shown me exactly what's wrong. His words were simple, but they cut deep. Sarah's face went from white to red, her cheeks burning like she'd been slapped. The plane was still quiet, but you could feel the excitement buzzing underneath. The passengers started whispering, their voices like little waves crashing. "He owns the airline," the lady with glasses said, her voice high and happy. "I knew he was special," the bearded guy added, nodding hard. The mom with the baby giggled, bouncing her little one. "She's in big trouble now," she whispered. They were all on Tom's side, cheering inside even if they didn't shout it out loud. Sarah tried to say something else. I didn't know," she stammered, her hands shaking now. She took a step back, bumping into the wall by the door. Her clipboard fell to the floor with a clack, and she didn't even pick it up. She looked around, like she was hoping someone would help her, but nobody did. The other flight attendant, the ponytail girl, peeked out from behind a curtain, her eyes wide, but she didn't say a word. Sarah was alone, and she knew it. Tom didn't yell or get mad. He didn't need to. His calm voice and that shiny badge had done all the work. He'd been watching Sarah all day, every mean word, every laugh, every slap, and now she knew it. Her world, the one where she thought she was the boss, was gone. It blew up right in her face, and there was no fixing it. Let's picture that moment. The plane was stopped, parked at the gate, with the door open to the tunnel outside. The seats were empty now, except for a few bags still lying around. The little windows showed the airport lights twinkling in the dark, and the air smelled like jet fuel and coffee. Sarah stood by the door, her uniform wrinkled, her face a mess of shock and fear. Tom was right in front of her, his cane tapping the floor once more, tap like a judge banging a gavel. The passengers still in the aisle didn't move. They wanted to see what happened next. The lady with glasses clutched her purse, her eyes shining. The bearded guy grinned, his arms uncrossed now, like he was ready to clap. The mom with the baby hugged her little one close, smiling big. They'd watched Sarah be mean all day, and now they were watching her fall. It felt good, like a story where the bad guy finally loses. Sarah's hands shook more, and she tried one last time to talk. I'm sorry," she said, her voice tiny, like a mouse squeaking. But Tom didn't answer. He didn't need to. He'd said what he had to say, and that badge had said the rest. He turned away from her, slow and steady, and started walking toward the door. Tap, tap, tap. His cane hit the floor, and each tap was like a nail in Sarah's coffin. The truth was out, and it was huge. Tom wasn't just some old man with a cane. He was Tom Harrison, the big boss, the one who owned every seat, every tray, every wheel on that plane. Sarah had picked on him, laughed at him, slapped his hand, and now she was paying for it. Her fake smile, her sharp words, her mean laughs, they were all gone, blown away like leaves in the wind. How do you think Sarah felt right then? Scared. Small. Like she wanted to disappear? She stood there, her eyes big and wet, her mouth still open, watching Tom walk away. Her world had flipped upside down, and she couldn't fix it. The passengers watched too, their whispers growing louder now. "She deserves it," the bearded guy said. "He's the boss," the lady with glasses cheered. Tom didn't look back. He didn't need to. He'd dropped the bomb, and it had exploded right where it needed to. Sarah's day wasn't just over, it was ruined. And Tom? He was just getting started. What do you think happened next? Stick around, because this story's not done yet. Resolution and justice served. The plane was parked at the gate now, with the door wide open, letting in the cool night air from the airport. The big reveal had just happened. Tom Harrison, the quiet man with the cane, had shown everyone he was the boss of the whole airline. Sarah, the mean flight attendant, stood there with her face white and her jaw dropped, like she'd seen a ghost. The passengers were buzzing, whispering and smiling, still shocked that Tom was the big guy in charge. But the story didn't end with that shiny badge. Oh no, it was time for things to get fixed, and Tom wasn't messing around. Tom wasn't just mad about how Sarah treated him, he was done with people like her ruining his airline. He'd watched her all day, listened to her sharp words, felt her slap his hand, and seen her laugh at him. He'd had enough. Standing there by the door, with his cane in one hand and that gold badge tucked back in his pocket, he turned his head and looked around. His eyes were sharp, like a hawk spotting something far away. He saw a man in a blue uniform standing just outside the plane door, an airport worker with a radio on his belt. "Hey," Tom called, his voice low but strong, like a drum beating slow. The man in the blue uniform stepped closer, his eyebrows going up. "Yes, sir," he said, tilting his head. Tom pointed right at Sarah, who was still frozen by the door, her hands shaking a little. "Get the airport manager here. Now," Tom said. His words weren't loud, but they hit hard, like rocks dropping into a bucket. The worker nodded fast, grabbing his radio and talking into it. "Manager to gate 12, quick," he said, his voice crackly through the little speaker. Sarah's eyes got bigger, and she took a tiny step back, bumping into the wall again. What's going on?" she stammered, her voice all wobbly now. She didn't sound mean anymore, just scared. Tom didn't answer her. He stood there, leaning on his cane, waiting. The passengers still in the aisle didn't move. They wanted to see what happened next. The lady with glasses clutched her purse tighter, her face bright with excitement. The bearded guy from row 10 grinned, his arms crossed like he was watching a show. The mom with the baby rocked her little one and smiled, whispering, "He's doing something big." It didn't take long. A few minutes later, a man in a black suit came jogging down the tunnel toward the plane. He had a name tag that said manager in big letters, and his face was serious, like he knew something important was up. He stepped onto the plane, his shoes squeaking on the floor, and looked at Tom. "Mr. Harrison," he said, his voice polite but a little nervous. He'd heard of Tom Harrison, the big boss of the airline, and he knew this wasn't just a normal call. Tom nodded, slow and steady. "That's me," he said. Then he pointed at Sarah again, his finger straight and sure. "This flight attendant's done," he said, his voice like a hammer hitting a nail. "She's fired. Right now." The manager's eyes went wide, and he turned to look at Sarah, who was shaking her head fast, like she couldn't believe her ears. Tom didn't stop there. "And I want a full review of everyone on this crew," he added. "Check them all. I don't want anyone else treating people like she did." The manager nodded quick, pulling out a little notepad from his pocket and scribbling something down. "Yes, sir, Mr. Harrison," he said, his pen moving fast. "I'll take care of it." He looked at Sarah, then back at Tom, like he was making sure he got it right. Tom just stood there, his cane tapping the floor once tap like he was sealing the deal. The passengers gasped, then started whispering again. "She's fired," the lady with glasses said, her voice high and happy. "He's cleaning house," the bearded guy added, nodding big. Sarah couldn't stay quiet anymore. She stepped forward, her hands waving around like she was trying to catch something. No, wait," she said, her voice loud but cracking. "You can't do this. I didn't know who you were. I was just doing my job." She was babbling now, words tumbling out like marbles spilling from a bag. "It's not fair. I didn't mean it. Please, give me another chance." Her face was red, her eyes wet, like she might cry any second. She looked at the manager, then at Tom, then at the passengers, hoping someone would help her. But nobody listened. The manager didn't even look at her. He kept writing in his notepad, following Tom's orders. The passengers didn't say a word to help her either. They'd seen everything, how she snapped at Tom, laughed at him, slapped his hand, and they were done with her. The lady with glasses shook her head, like Sarah wasn't worth her time. The bearded guy turned away, his grin getting bigger. The mom with the baby just rocked her little one, her face calm but firm. Sarah's excuses didn't matter. She'd messed up, and now it was time to pay. Tom looked at the manager again. "Get security," he said, his voice still low but strong. "I want her off this plane." The manager nodded fast, grabbing his radio again. "Security to gate 12, he said into it, his voice quick and sharp. Sarah's eyes got even bigger, and she shook her head harder. "No, please," she said, her hands reaching out now. "I'm sorry. I didn't know. I'll be better, I swear." But Tom didn't budge. He'd heard enough. Two big guys in dark uniforms, security guards, came walking up the tunnel a minute later. Their boots thumped on the floor, loud and heavy, like drums in a parade. They stepped onto the plane, their faces serious, and looked at the manager. "What's up?" one of them asked, his voice deep. The manager pointed at Sarah. "She's done," he said. "Take her out." The guards nodded and turned to Sarah, who was backing up now, her hands up like she could stop them. "No, no, no," Sarah yelled, her voice high and panicky. "You can't do this. I didn't do anything wrong." But the guards didn't listen. One of them grabbed her arm, not hard but firm, and the other stood close, making sure she didn't run. "Let's go," the first guard said, his voice calm but no nonsense. Sarah tried to pull away, but she couldn't. The guards were too strong, and they started walking her toward the door. The passengers watched, and then it happened, they started clapping. It was slow at first, just a few hands coming together, clap, clap, but then it grew. The lady with glasses clapped loud, her purse bouncing on her lap. The bearded guy joined in, his big hands making a booming sound, clap, clap, clap. The mom with the baby clapped too, soft so she wouldn't wake her little one. Soon, everyone still on the plane was clapping, a big wave of noise rolling through the air. They were happy Sarah was going, happy Tom was fixing things. Sarah's face turned redder as the guards pulled her away. She twisted her head back, looking at Tom, her eyes full of tears now. "I'm sorry," she shouted one last time, but it didn't matter. The guards kept moving, walking her down the tunnel and out of sight. Her voice got quieter and quieter until it was gone, and all you could hear was the clapping. Sarah was history done, finished, out of there. Tom turned to the passengers, the ones still standing in the aisle and the few sitting in their seats. He leaned on his cane a little, his scarred face calm but strong. Then, for the first time, he smiled. It wasn't a big smile, just a small one, but it lit up his eyes. "Folks," he said, his voice clear and steady, "I promise you this airline's about respect. For everyone." He paused, looking around at their faces. "Starting today, things change." The crowd went wild. The clapping turned into cheers, loud, happy shouts that filled the plane. "Yeah," the bearded guy yelled, pumping his fist in the air. "Woohoo," the lady with glasses called, waving her hands. The mom with the baby laughed, her little one giggling too. They loved it, they loved Tom, loved what he was doing. He wasn't just some quiet guy with a cane anymore. He was their hero, the one who took back control and made things right. The manager stepped closer to Tom, his notepad still in his hand. "I'll get that review started, Mr. Harrison," he said, his voice quick and eager. "We'll check everyone on the crew, just like you said." Tom nodded, slow and sure. "Good," he said. "Make sure it's fair. But if they're like her, they're gone too." The manager scribbled more, then gave a little salute. "Yes, sir," he said, and hurried off to get to work. The passengers kept cheering as they started moving again, walking out the door into the tunnel. They smiled at Tom as they passed, some even saying thank you, or good job. The lady with glasses stopped for a second and looked at him. "You're amazing," she said, her voice soft but happy. Tom just nodded, his small smile still there. The bearded guy clapped Tom on the shoulder as he went by, not too hard because of the cane. "You showed her," he said, grinning big. Tom nodded again, steady as ever. The mom with the baby was the last to go. She stopped and looked at Tom, her little one asleep in her arms. "Thanks for making it better," she said, her voice quiet but real. Tom looked at her and the baby, his eyes soft for a second. "It's my airline," he said. "It's gotta be right." She smiled, then walked off, her steps light and happy. The plane got quiet again as everyone left. The seats were empty now, with just a few wrappers and cups lying around. The little windows showed the dark sky outside, with airport lights twinkling like stars. The air smelled like jet fuel and pretzels, and the hum of the engines was gone. Tom stood by the door, his cane tapping the floor one more time, tap. He looked around, making sure everything was done. Sarah was gone, the crew was getting checked, and the passengers were happy. He'd taken back control, and it felt good, really good. Let's think about that moment. Sarah had been mean all day, thinking she could boss everyone around. She'd snapped at Tom, laughed at him, pushed him down with her words and her hands. But Tom wasn't just some guy, he was the big boss, the one who owned the whole airline. He didn't yell or fight back with fists. He used his power, his quiet strength, and he fixed it all. Sarah was out, and the airline was going to be better now. The passengers saw it, felt it, and they loved it. Tom didn't need to shout or show off. He didn't need to be loud to win. He just stood there, with his cane and his scars, and let the truth do the work. Sarah's excuses didn't save her. Nobody cared what she had to say anymore. The clapping, the cheering, the smiles, they were all for Tom. He'd made things right, and it was like a big, happy ending to a wild day. What would you have done in his shoes? Would you have fired Sarah too? Or maybe told her off in front of everyone? Tom picked his way, and it worked. He showed Sarah and everyone that respect matters, and he wasn't going to let his airline be a place for bullies. The passengers walked away happy, the plane stood quiet, and Tom? He was the hero of the day. Sarah was history, and things were going to change. It felt good, really, really good. Reflective or inspiring closing. And that's the whole story, folks. It's the tale of how one man, Tom Harrison, took a mean slap and turned it into a big, amazing victory. He didn't just sit there and take it. Oh no, he stood up tall and showed everyone what he was made of. Tom wasn't loud or bossy like Sarah. He didn't yell or wave his arms around to make people look at him. He didn't need to shout or show off to prove he was strong. His power was different, quiet, steady, and real. It was the kind of power that grows inside you, like a seed turning into a big tree, even when people try to push you down or step on you. Think about it for a second. Sarah, the flight attendant with the sharp tongue, thought she could treat Tom like he was nothing. She laughed at him, snapped at him, even slapped his hand, all because he moved slow with his cane. She saw his scars and his quiet ways and figured he wasn't important. Boy, was she wrong. Tom didn't fight back with mean words or loud fights. He waited, watched, and then bam, he showed her who he really was. The big boss of the airline. He turned that slap into a win, not just for himself, but for everyone on that plane who'd been treated bad by her. That's the cool thing about Tom's story. He didn't need to be the loudest guy in the room to be the strongest. Real power isn't about making a big noise or pushing people around. It's about standing tall, even when someone's trying to knock you over. It's about keeping your head up, even when people laugh or say mean things. Tom showed us that. He took all of Sarah's rudeness, all her bullying, and he turned it around. He didn't let it break him, he used it to make things better. That's what a real winner does. So here's something to think about next time you're out in the world. Maybe you're at school, or on a bus, or just walking down the street. If you see someone being treated like they're nothing, like they don't matter, stop and look again. You never know who they really are. That quiet kid in the back of the class. The one who doesn't talk much. They might be super smart or really brave, just waiting for their moment. That person moving slow with a cane, like Tom? They could be someone big, someone strong, hiding right there in plain sight. The quiet ones, the ones people ignore or pick on, they might just be the ones who change everything. Tom's story teaches us that. Sarah thought he was weak because he didn't fight back right away. She thought she could push him down because he didn't shout or argue. But Tom wasn't weak, he was waiting. He had a plan, a secret, and when the time was right, he showed it to everyone. That shiny badge he pulled out? It wasn't just a piece of metal. It was proof that he was bigger than Sarah's mean words, bigger than her slap, bigger than all her bullying. He didn't need to scream to win, he just needed to be himself, steady and strong. Let's picture that plane one more time. It's sitting at the gate, empty now, with the seats all quiet and the little windows dark. The passengers are gone, walking away with big smiles because Tom made things right. Sarah's out of there, history, done, because she couldn't push Tom down. He stood up not with fists or yells, but with truth and power. The air in that plane doesn't smell like trouble anymore, it smells like a fresh start, like things are going to be better from now on. Tom did that. One man, with a cane and a quiet voice, changed it all. So what's the big lesson here? It's simple, don't judge people by how loud they are or how fast they move. Don't think someone's weak just because they don't fight back right away. Real strength isn't about making noise, it's about standing tall when it counts. Tom Harrison didn't just win a fight with Sarah. He showed us something bigger. He showed us that you can be quiet and still be a hero. You can be slow and still be strong. You can take a slap and turn it into a victory that everyone cheers for. Next time you see someone being mean, picking on somebody who doesn't fight back, think of Tom. Maybe that quiet person's got something up their sleeve, just like he did. Maybe they're waiting for the perfect moment to stand up and surprise everyone. And maybe, just maybe, you can be like Tom too. You don't have to be the loudest or the fastest to make a difference. You just have to be brave, stand tall, and do what's right when the time comes. That's real power, the kind that changes things, the kind that lasts. Thanks for sticking with me through this wild story. It was a crazy ride, wasn't it? From that sunny takeoff to Sarah's mean slap, all the way to Tom's big moment with that badge. It's a tale full of surprises. What did you think of Tom's big win? Did it make you cheer? Did it make you think? Drop it in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you've got to say. And don't go too far, because I'll see you in the next story. Who knows what adventure we'll have next time. Bye for now, and keep being awesome. Let's think about Tom one more time before we go. He wasn't big or tall or loud. He had scars on his face and a cane to help him walk. He looked like someone you might not notice, sitting there in row 12. But inside, he was huge, stronger than Sarah, stronger than her mean words, stronger than anyone thought. He didn't need to shout to show it. He just waited, watched, and then stood up when it mattered most. That's the kind of person who changes the world, not with noise, but with heart. So keep your eyes open out there. The next time someone tries to push you down or you see them pushing someone else, remember Tom. You don't have to be loud to be mighty. You don't have to fight back with fists to win. Sometimes, all it takes is standing tall, holding your ground, and letting the truth do the talking. That's what Tom did, and look what happened. Sarah's gone, the passengers are happy, and the airline's going to be better. One quiet man made all that happen. Pretty cool, right? And hey, this isn't just a story, it's a little push for you too. Maybe you're quiet sometimes, or maybe people don't always see how great you are. That's okay. You don't need them to see it right away. Like Tom, you can wait for your moment. You can be strong in your own way, even if it's not loud or fast. The world's full of Sarah's, people who think they can push others around, but it's the Toms who really shine in the end. Be a Tom. Stand tall, even when it's hard, and you'll see good things happen when you do. Alright, that's it for now. I had so much fun telling you the story. Tom's big moment, pulling out that badge and showing Sarah who's boss, was the best part, don't you think? What was your favorite bit? Tell me in the comments, I can't wait to read what you say. And stick around, because there's more stories coming your way. Thanks for being here, and I'll catch you next time with something just as exciting. See ya soon.